What is going on, everybody? It's Brendan Abbott coming to you with the KBR Sports Podcast. You already know, the best sports podcast of your 24-hour day. Appreciate everybody for tuning into the KBR Sports Podcast today, especially after that eventful weekend of NFL football we all have to go off of. I mean, got to be appreciative of a lot of the good content. Or at least, even though the games weren't all the best, at least it gave us outcomes that we have to look forward towards this week and this weekend and what we can expect in the NFL. So before I get things kicked off, guys, remember, make sure you hit the subscribe button or make sure you follow the KBR Sports Podcast, depending on whatever platform you're listening on, whether it's Spreaker, YouTube, Rabble, SoundCloud, or iTunes. Just make sure you go ahead and hit the subscribe button or hit the follow button to make sure you never miss a KBR Sports Podcast episode moving forward, as well as following the KBR Sports Twitter page at KBR_sports, where different sports events and topics are discussed on that Twitter page, as well as my own Twitter page at Abben Brendan, which is ABBANBRENDAN, where you can catch all what I have to say about different sports events and topics as well. And it's just a little bit of a different twist where I give my own personal opinions, whereas the KBR Sports Podcast gives more statistical and factual information. I'm more so giving out opinions and my thoughts and stuff, kind of like I do on the podcast. So make sure you guys go and follow both Twitter pages, and make sure, most importantly, you guys comment and leave your opinions on anything I have to say in regards to the podcast, or anything you have ideas for the podcast moving forward. Always appreciate you guys' input and what you have to say to follow up on any episode I always end up putting out and everything like that. But guys, to get things kicked off, man, I wanted to definitely jump in, and before I talked about the podcast or talked about the events of the weekend, I just wanted to say, man, I know a lot of people are going through snow and all this stuff, and I feel like my gripe of what I have and the issue I have is going to be like seem minuscule in comparison to a lot of people. But man, this past weekend, guys, I mean, even today, I am still dealing with the ramifications of just having bug bites everywhere. Like, I don't even know how to deal with it, and I don't know what the remedy is for us. If you guys have any ideas, like, I know that they say just don't itch them. My friends have made recommendations of you use like the X thing to exit out, and it stops you from itching. Nick came up with that, as well as Natalie, and I've just tried to find different means because I have been itching so much from these mosquito bites, and I have had no idea of how to stop this. So if you guys have any ideas, I beg of you to please give me your ideas in comments and leave them on the podcast so I can check them out and just try something else, because I'm not kidding you. Like, it is just so hard to not scratch all the time. Like, I feel like I can itch myself more than a dog who has fleas. Like, it's that real. So definitely would love to see you guys' opinions. And I know that a lot of people are like, oh, well, this guy's complaining about it, even though he has the sunshine and all this stuff. Look, guys, there are ups and downs to it, and the bugs are part of the downs, because my Lord, I am itchy, and it is no joke. Like, I feel like I could do the whole dog scratching thing and I wouldn't be ashamed at all, because it's honestly that problematic at this point. But guys, I mean, what a weekend, right? When we're talking about what everybody was expecting for the divisional round matchups and everything, where we have Patriots versus the Chargers, the Chiefs versus the Colts, the Rams versus the Cowboys, and the Eagles versus the Saints. When we look at how everything bore out, I mean, let's really think about it. Each situation and each team that advanced to their championship round of their conference was a prolific coach who's either making waves as a historic, they're doing something historic, or they've done something historic, or they've had long standing in the league. Bill Belichick, we don't even need an explanation on that one. 5 Super Bowl rings at this point, multiple trips to the Super Bowl with arguably the greatest quarterback of all time, and arguably greatest NFL player of all time in Tom Brady. Drew Brees and Sean Payton. Sean Payton, the original offensive wizard, genius in terms of how to innovate the offensive schemes and everything, with Drew Brees, who could be argued for the best statistical quarterback next to Peyton Manning of all time. So you got that. Then you got Andy Reid, who's also amongst that class of the Sean Paytons, the Mike Tomlins, and so on, in that class of guys who have been able to keep their team in a successful position. But he's also mastered the ability to lead offenses and always have his offenses be top 10 in scoring each and every year, along with Drew Brees. And then you have Sean McVay, who's the coach of the Rams. I mean, they're an up and coming team that in the past 2 years, I mean, when we look at Sean McVay's record in the last 2 years, you can't help but to be impressed, because his record in the last 2 years with the Rams is 24-8. That's a 75% win percentage. And definitely he's made a huge turnaround with this roster, a similar roster to what Jeff Fisher had to work with 2 years ago. So you tip your hat and give credit to Sean McVay with the fact that, one, he turned around Jared Goff from who everybody was thinking was a bust and thought Jared Goff was pretty much not, it was a bust as a number one pick, to making him seem like he's a worthwhile quarterback in the league, to now having this team in the NFC Championship and one win away from a possible Super Bowl berth. So when you're looking at all these different situations, I mean, I look at each guy's each coach's run of success. I mean, Bill Belichick's winning percentage with the Patriots, 74% in the regular season, and even in the postseason it gets even better, or it's right there with 73.7%. Then you look at, I already listed Sean McVay's, and I mean, they only had one playoff game under the Sean McVay era, so he hasn't won a playoff. Well, actually, they have two, so they're 1-1 in the playoffs under the Sean McVay era. Then you look at Sean Payton, who has a winning percentage of 61.5%, and the same goes for the playoffs. They're 8-5 in the playoffs, and so Sean Payton has 118 wins and 74 losses under his belt. But then you go look at a guy like Andy Reid, and in Andy Reid's time at Kansas City, I mean, he's been successful. I mean, there's definitely more regular season success than postseason, but in the regular season with Kansas City, Andy Reid, 67.7 win percentage with a 2-4 playoff record. That definitely needs to improve on Andy Reid's part. But when you're 65-31 in the regular season, you do have to tip your hat off to him and just give respect where it's due. And so when you look at each of these situations in terms of who's made it in each conference, I mean, I've looked at it and I have to ask myself the sincere question. When you're looking at Drew Brees, the Sean Payton tandem, because each time these quarterbacks have long-term success, or they get to multiple championships, or they make deep runs into the playoffs, they tend to have a they tend to have a coach who they're tied with, and a coach that they're synonymous with, and that coach knows how to work with that quarterback and how to build a roster around that quarterback, a la Sean Payton, Drew Brees, and then Bill Belichick, Tom Brady. And then when looking at the scenarios of what we have to work with moving forward, it kind of made me ask the question, I mean, should we really be looking at Jared Goff and Patrick Mahomes and think these guys got next? Because while I know, don't get me wrong, I know Andrew Luck, besides like Aaron Rodgers and these other guys, is probably the best quarterback in the game, besides Tom Brady, Drew Brees, Aaron Rodgers. Andrew Luck is probably that guy, that next guy. But that's only because Patrick Mahomes hasn't played long enough for us to give him that credit. That's the only reason why that we don't put Patrick Mahomes in that conversation yet, because he hasn't only played. This is his first season starting. It's not his rookie year, but it's his first full year as a starter. But Patrick Mahomes' first season as a starter is better than any season that I can go and pick from Andrew Luck and say that Andrew Luck's given me. I mean, Patrick Mahomes as a starter, I mean, the guy threw for 50 touchdowns, 5,097 yards and to 12 interceptions. I mean, come on now. 81.6 quarterback rating, 113.8 passer rating. The guy was unreal this year with a 66% completion percentage. He was thrilling to watch. I mean, in terms of just how well that Chiefs offense was all throughout the year, and it wasn't like they had a dip. Like that was a team that was carried by his offense all year. All I heard people saying was criticizing how good the Chiefs' our defense was, and that they were completely an offensive team. But when push came to shove, I see Patrick Mahomes being the one to make the plays that really counted when they went head-to-head in the Chiefs and Colts game. So when I'm looking at it in terms of the AFC, while Andrew Luck might be this, like, in terms of pure talent, even that, I don't know who I would take Andrew Luck or Patrick Mahomes based off this year. Patrick Mahomes just seems like that guy. I mean, he's gonna win the MVP award. If he doesn't win the MVP award, the thing is rigged. Like, there's no joke about it. There's no playing around it. It's a rigged award if he doesn't win it. Because I just list off the stats, it's ridiculous. But in regards to how well Patrick Mahomes has played, I mean, you gotta think about him in that class. But getting back to my original point, most times quarterbacks and coaches that are synonymous and tied together, that a quarterback can grow with that coach, and so on. That coach can change the system around that quarterback and build around that quarterback. And especially when the quarterback is young, you have that room to put pieces around them because they're on a cheaper contract. hence Jared Goff, hence Patrick Mahomes. When these guys are on these cheaper contracts, it gives you a lot more maneuverability to be able to make changes. And so many people are going to say, oh, but you got to pay Jared Goff in a few years. You got Patrick Mahomes is this and that. Look, the time to win is when these guys are on their rookie deals. Look at what happened to the Seahawks when they paid Russell Wilson. Look what happened to the Packers when they paid Aaron Rodgers. Look what happened. You can look at all these different teams and look at the scenarios of how those teams changed because they couldn't pay the Legion of Boom. They couldn't pay this defensive guy. They couldn't pay all these different players because they have to conserve the money for the quarterback. That's part of the reasons why the Rams bought in fully this year by getting all these one-year deal guys because they realized, hey, there's this window where we have a viable Super Bowl quarterback on a cheap contract is very rare. And it is very rare to get a quality Super Bowl quarterback. Most times these guys are going to be taxing you. And in most cases, unless you're in a Bill Belichick, Tom Brady situation, if your quarterback is on a big contract, you're most likely not going to win the Super Bowl. And you're not going to make it to the Super Bowl because you just don't have enough talent. A lot of cases when you see people getting to the Super Bowl and winning the Super Bowl is when and even Tom Brady, I mean, he took a pay cut to make it work with the team. So when you're looking at these situations, a lot of times where guys are getting to the Super Bowl and winning the Super Bowl, it's before they get the big contract, before they get the big money. And after they get the money, they don't get there. They don't get there. I mean, the Eagles team from last year was built brilliantly, but they also, you look at the contracts, Carson Wentz on his rookie deal, Nick Foles, backup quarterback. Your money isn't tied up in your quarterback position. So then you spread it out amongst the rest of your roster, which increases your depth and your overall starting talent. So when we're looking at these next guys, I mean, you can make the argument that Jared Goff and Patrick Mahomes do have next in each conference. I mean, in the NFC, if I'm building up in the NFC and I'm looking at the teams, do you think Mitch Trubisky's as good as Jared Goff, particularly at throwing the football? No. Dak Prescott. The Cowboys have talent, don't get me wrong. They have talent, but too much of what the Cowboys do is so predicated on Ezekiel Elliott because of the limits that Dak Prescott has in his game. So when we're looking at that, you gotta sit there and realize, like, hey, these guys, there are setbacks. There's little things that hold back these other teams. That while Jared Goff, he might not be the perfect quarterback, and I'm not going to trust Jared Goff more than I'm trusting like an Aaron Rodgers or Drew Brees. But obviously, look at the names I just listed. These are the guys at the top echelon of the game. And there was a time when Jared Goff was in the MVP discussion. Yes, he did fall off. Don't get me wrong. I'm not going to try and sway this argument and make it seem like Jared Goff doesn't have his faults and setbacks. But I'm talking about in terms of upcoming quarterbacks in the NFC. In comparison to Jared Goff, paired with Sean McVay, I'm not just looking at Jared Goff by himself, but Jared Goff has Todd Gurley under contract for years, Brandon Cooks under contract for years, Cooper Kupp under contract for years, Aaron Donald. There's a foundation for the Rams with their talent, So that's one of those things that I'm looking at the NFC and I'm sitting here thinking this team can get back to this point, possibly for years. Now, granted, you have teams like the Bears that have defensive prowess and the Cowboys and so on with that kind of prowess. And you obviously have teams like the Saints, but the Rams' level of talent, and as they keep getting more and more experience, they can get back to this point. And I'm the first one to tell people it's never guaranteed for you to come back and return back to the postseason and make a run back at the Super Bowl. It is never guaranteed. That's why you got to seize it while you're there and while you have the opportunity. But if there's any team that's set up to make that push for the future, it is the Rams. It's the Rams, and I'll have to say the Eagles. The Rams and Eagles for sure, but the only problem is Carson Wentz gets hurt too much. That's the reason why I would say Sean McVay and Jared Goff have next, because Jared Goff isn't spending every single week 15 or 14 out with an injury, which is where we've seen Carson Wentz at for the past few weeks or the past 2 years. So now when we look at the AFC and I'm looking at a team like the Patriots and other teams that are the competition of Patrick Mahomes and Andy Reid in that pairing, I mean, I'm sorry, Andrew Luck just doesn't even have the talent compared to Patrick Mahomes. in terms of having guys like Cheetah and Tyreek Hill and Travis Kelce and so on, Damian Williams, and the list goes on and on and on. And you can just reel off these guys' talent for days, and just the explosiveness of that offense. I mean, those 4 teams, funny enough, are all teams that led the league in scoring this year. The Chiefs were number 1 in scoring, Rams were number 2, Patriots were 3rd, and then the Saints were 4th. So when you're looking at it from that vantage point, you can't help but be entertained and realize, wow, all these teams are all in positions to, they're panned out in a way where these high scoring offenses were backed by these quarterbacks and led by these quarterbacks. So now all these teams are in positions to obviously make a run at the Super Bowl. And sorry, I mixed up the Patriots and Saints. The Saints are 3rd in scoring, the Patriots are 4th. I mixed it up a little bit. But the overall point of what I'm saying is that when I'm looking at these teams, like, I don't think people realize Jared Goff is in what is his 4th season. What is his 4th season, his 3rd season. Jared Goff is in his 3rd season. So when we're sitting there looking at what Jared Goff is, imagine getting a Super Bowl ring by your 3rd season. Like, just think about that real quick. In your 3rd season, winning a Super Bowl. Now, that doesn't happen for many guys unless your name is Tom Brady. And so, like, you have to really think about what kind of accolade that is to accomplish that by your 3rd season. Patrick Mahomes to accomplish that by your 2nd season. And then realize, now you know what it takes to get to the mountaintop. The most dangerous thing in the league to have as a quarterback and just as a team overall is experience. You don't ever want to let that, like right now, if the Patriots beat the Chiefs and knock them off from getting to the Super Bowl, you could argue that there's a little bit of that LeBron on the Toronto Raptors effect, where people already have that feeling about the Patriots that we just can't beat this team. There's nothing we can do to stop this team from getting to the Super Bowl. This team is always going to get to the Super Bowl. They're the best team, and they're always going to get to the Super Bowl. But when you break through and you get to that point and you know what it takes, and you know, hey, we're able to do this and that, these are the things that are required, that's how you start building these kind of dynasties. That's how you start making your name always be associated with getting to a Super Bowl. Sean Payton and Drew Brees have not been to a Super Bowl since they won their last one. But they just always have an organization that's set, and they know how to run the organization, what it takes to get to the Super Bowl. So in these moments where Drew Brees and those guys will have an edge over a team like the Rams because of the fact that they've been there before, whereas the Rams haven't. But then when you let a team learn how to win and learn how to win big, that's the most dangerous team, especially if they're young. That was what we were looking at with the Seattle Seahawks once upon a time. If arguably you changed the play call on the goal line with Malcolm Butler and then not giving the ball to beast mode, who knows what that Seahawks dynasty becomes and what that Patriots dynasty is now. Everybody looks back at that, and you can make an argument that that was the deciding factor in where both franchises are today. So if we got to realize just what is possibly at stake in these, and not only is it just winning the Super Bowl, but getting to the Super Bowl is a huge factor. It's a huge thing to accomplish at a young point in one's career, especially if you are just partnered with your coach in that way. Your coach is an offensive coach or whatever the case may be, and you're partnered with them and they have a system that just works for you, and you know that's going to be like, you guys are forever for each other for the most part. Bill Belichick, Tom Brady, Sean Payton, Drew Brees. It's too early to say about Patrick Mahomes and Andy Reid or Jared Goff and Sean McVay, but just think about the possibilities. If those guys stay together and the offensive weapons that Sean McVay was able to retool around Jared Goff, and the same thing with Andy Reid, oh my gosh, that's just a problem for the rest of the league, guys. But definitely, I'm going to get more into the matchups. And this is what happened over this past weekend when I come back from my break. It's KBR Sports, the best sports podcast of your 24-hour day. Alright guys, so I say it every single time I feel like I come on the podcast, and for good reason. I always say you guys should always check out Fanatics. They have the best apparel and sports memorabilia items for you guys to either put on for yourself or to even get for somebody else. If you want good fitting clothes, good just looking clothes in general, just good looking stuff that you can put on or you want to get to support your favorite teams, just go to the best place to get it at. If you go anywhere else, I mean, it's kind of like, you know, when you see your friend wearing knockoff clothes and you're like, Bro, look, you should have just get the real stuff. Like when they have the Nike sign turned backwards and it's not facing the right. Nah, bro, you gotta go get the real stuff. And Fanatics is the real stuff. That's where you can get all the authentic jerseys, all the real stuff that the players actually wear. That's the kind of stuff that you guys want to make sure you're decking yourselves out in. So make sure you guys go to fanatics.com and pick yourselves up some apparel, some memorabilia to decorate your man cave, or even to get your significant other something. Make sure you guys go ahead and deck yourselves out in some Fanatics gear. Alright guys, so I wanted to definitely jump back into the NFL and this talking about the playoff picture and what we saw from the weekend. I mean, it was definitely a situation where I was surprised at the outcome of a lot of the games. Not more so just because of the fact that some games were blowouts, like the Chiefs Colts game. That was pretty surprising to me. I didn't anticipate it to go that way, where it was 31-13. The Colts just looked like they weren't ready to play. They got totally owned by the Chiefs, and it was surprising to me. I didn't expect that to go down that way. But aside from that, I mean, then you also had games like the Chargers and the Patriots. I mean, 41-28 doesn't tell the full story of that game. I mean, there was a point where the Patriots had more points than the Chargers had first downs. It was something, a funny stat like that, and it was just ridiculous to even think about. The Patriots had more first downs than the Chargers had points, and it's just kind of ridiculous to kind of think of things along those lines. I mean, they were getting owned, guys. Like, they were getting punished. Like, it was bad. And this was like early, and this was like in the first half. I think the Patriots had like 21 first downs and the Chargers had like 3 points or something. Like, it was honestly just a rough game. Like, it looked like the Patriots gave them a punch, a haymaker right from the get-go, and from a degree it felt like the Chargers just didn't really know how to bounce back and recover from it. So when I was seeing that, I was just like, man, how could, like, we always sit back and we always do this thing where if the Patriots don't perform up to our standards, then we're like, oh, the Patriots are done. The Patriots are finished. But then when I see Tom Brady go 34 of 44 for 343 yards, a touchdown, and have a 87.2 quarterback rating and a 106.5 pass rating, kind of makes me start to feel like we're all stupid and that the Patriots know something that we all don't know, because it seems like this always happens every single year. That we are always trying to convince ourselves that the dynasty is over. And what does it mean for the Patriots dynasty to be over? I think that's one big question in and of itself. I think everybody almost low-key begs for the Patriots dynasty to be over. But I think it's one of those things that it won't be over until Tom Brady can't throw a football anymore, until Bill Belichick doesn't want to coach. It starts to feel that way after some point. It starts to feel like we're always just trying to convince ourselves that the dynasty is over, and we're always trying to make up these arguments and convolute these different narratives that the dynasty is over. But I can honestly say that I feel like it's kind of like the same thing with Golden State. The Golden State Warriors, I'm not going to pick against the Golden State Warriors until the Golden State Warriors have lost. Like, until they are knocked out of the finals and they are beaten, I will not pick against the Golden State Warriors to not get to the NBA Finals, because everybody is always trying to break apart a great tandem, or always trying to drive a wedge, or trying to pick out weaknesses. And granted, the Patriots do have their weaknesses. They're not a perfect team by any means. But each time they won the Super Bowl, would you go back to those Patriot teams and say they were a perfect team? No, I wouldn't. I wouldn't say that they were the most talented team. I wouldn't say that they were the most athletic, or whatever case you want to have. And in a lot of those instances, they still came out on top of the opposing team in a lot of instances like that. So when I sit back and I look at these different scenarios and everything like that, like coming into this game, don't get me wrong, I chose the Chargers. I thought the Chargers were going to be able to beat the Patriots, just because of the fact that the Chargers did seem to have the tools that normally give the Patriots trouble. The Chargers had secondary help that's able to lock up their individual man and defenders while the pass rush gets to the quarterback. And what is the number one thing that you do to get to Tom Brady and cause him troubles? You put a hat on him. You get to him in the backfield and start making him start tiptoeing and start tap dancing back there. But he didn't even get sacked once. Literally, the Chargers defense didn't even bother the guy. So when I'm looking at something like that, I mean, you got to sit back and think that we're always trying to just we're always trying to anticipate when the dynasty is over instead of just kind of embracing and enjoying the dynasty for what it is. Like, is it them losing in the Super Bowl last year? Oh, that's the end of the dynasty. But the fact that they got to another AFC championship, I mean, what is considered the end of the dynasty? And these are legitimate questions to ask, because I don't think people really know what the end of the dynasty looks like. I mean, I think that we all knew that the end of the dynasty for teams like the 96 Bulls and so on, when it was, and all those things, or the 98 Bulls, when that team was splitting up and all that, the Kobe Shaq dynasty, all those things, we could all pick apart when these dynasties were coming to an end, or when these runs for these teams were coming to an end. But the Patriots, it always seems like, oh yeah, they're done, and then they always have some other kind of way that they pull a rabbit out of their hat, and they keep it going for even a prolonged amount of time. So I'm starting to feel like we just got to get to a point where we just got to say, look, until Tom Brady says, this is my last season of football, I don't think you can count him out. Because, I mean, at the age of 40, going on 41, the guy is as good as anybody in the league. And then, I mean, you got the other guy in the other conference, and Drew Brees, who's at 39 going on 40, who looks just as good as Tom. So now you always got to sit back and think about it when you're watching these games, and think about who is that next big team that we have to keep an eye out for, or who is that team? Because I think a lot of people looked at in the NFC, they were thinking that the Eagles were that, but it just seems like the Eagles have so many problems in terms of health, and especially when it comes to Carson Wentz. The problems of Carson Wentz's health are no joke. I mean, people have been fielding different trade speculations and trade options for the Eagles just because of the fact that having Nick Foles and Carson Wentz on your roster, I don't know why people, I mean, if Nick Foles has no problem being the bench quarterback or the backup quarterback, I don't know why you wouldn't just have both quarterbacks on your roster. I mean, having two quarterbacks, somebody said something before I've heard, saying that having two quarterbacks is like having none. No, that's one of the stupidest lines I've ever heard. Having two quarterbacks is having two quarterbacks. So if your first quarterback gets hurt, then your second quarterback can take you to the Super Bowl. I mean, that's just all it is. Like, in all earnest, I mean, I don't know who came up with that slogan or that saying, but I don't agree with it at all. And I think that it's one of those situations where we're looking at the NFC, and you see a team like Dallas who went to LA and they allowed LA to have two 100-plus yard rushers. And when I say LA, I'm referring to the Rams, not the Chargers. But they allowed the Rams to have two 100-plus yard rushers. And this was a Dallas team that was supposed to be predicated on its defense. This was a Dallas team that was touted as a defensive-oriented team, that was a good defensive team. But then you see just the struggles that they had containing the Rams, and then the Rams were able to get what they wanted in so many situations in terms of getting what they wanted on the ground and then in the play action. The Rams were just having their way with the Cowboys. And so it was a very physical game in which you saw that the bye week did seem to give the Rams extra preparation time. They were very disciplined in terms of gap discipline. They never let Ezekiel Elliott get off and start doing his own thing. They never ever let it get to a point like that. And so you had to really start seeing how that bye week that the Rams had, that the Patriots had, that the Chiefs had, all those teams that had that bye week, aside for the Saints who got off to a slow start, were all blazing right off the gates, it seemed like. And so when you look, I mean, every single team that had a top seed scored over 30 points, scored 30 points or more, except for the Saints. And I mean, really, when I look at the Saints, I mean, the Saints haven't been that impressive over the last few weeks. And I've been saying this, I said this to a couple of people because I had Drew Brees as my fantasy quarterback. So trust me, I've been watching the Saints. And Drew Brees hasn't played all that well. I mean, he was right there next to Patrick Mahomes in MVP voting. But it seems like their play kind of took a dip at some point during the season. Like, it was like towards the later end of the season. Like, it was like they beat the Rams and then they beat a couple other, and then they just have been winning games, but not in Saints fashion where I look at their offense, I'm like, this offense is just omnipotent, that it's just such a tough offense to stop that we can't do anything about it. No. When I see a guy like Michael Thomas have pretty much all the receptions for the team, I'm sitting there looking like, okay, now you have one focal point that you have to stop next to Michael Thomas and Alvin Kamara. Those are the two guys you have to stop. And Michael Thomas went off, but they still only scored like 20 points. And if Alshon Jeffrey doesn't drop that pass, who knows what the result of that game is. So while I will say that this Final Four that we do have, I think that we do have the best teams in it in terms of all-around talent and coaching and quarterback play. I just think that when we're looking at it, I think that these other teams that could have made, I think more so in the Chargers to me were a disappointment. I think that this was the Chargers' year. I think that they had the most talent that they've had in years, and they were relatively healthy. I think they were pretty healthy from what I could gather. And I think this was just a huge, I know Foxborough has been a tough place to go play at. If you go to the KBR Sports Podcast Twitter page, you'll see on there how it's illustrated just how tough the Patriots have been to beat at home and how good Tom Brady was on Sunday. But that doesn't excuse just how bad the Chargers were. The Chargers just looked like they weren't ready to play. And granted, they haven't been on the road a lot. They've traveled from Baltimore to New England and from LA to Baltimore because they played the Ravens and then they had to go to New England. It's just been a tough slate for them. But then when you look at it, they were just so talented and so many people had them picked to go to the Super Bowl. And granted, you could say rightfully or wrongfully they were picked, but you can't doubt that this team had the talent to make that kind of Super Bowl run. And it's always one of those things I look back and I'm just like, man, I just don't know if Phillip Rivers is going to end up, like when we look back on the overall arching career of the greatest quarterbacks from certain draft classes or of this era and stuff like that. Like me and my friend Nick, we talked about it. Where does Phillip Rivers rank? Nick doesn't hold Phillip Rivers that high. I hold Phillip Rivers in higher regard than he does. But you can't just drop an egg in the AFC when an AFC championship berth is on the line and possibly a Super Bowl, especially when you have that kind of talent on defense and on offense. It's kind of a sad thing to watch, but we'll definitely have to see where this goes. I feel like a lot of times in these situations, matchups play the whole game. Matchups are what decides these games, and there were a lot of times, me personally, I did prefer to play the Cowboys over playing a team like the Eagles or the Saints from out the gate. I preferred for the Rams to play the Cowboys instead of the Bears, because I felt like the Bears play or model, how the Bears are built, was a model that was suited to beat the Rams, and rather than the Cowboys. So I think a lot of times in these, like, styles do make fights in the playoffs, and especially when one team has an extra week to prepare for another, you are in a way better situation and a lot of less things catch you off guard than when the other team just has 1 week to prepare for you. So it's definitely one of those situations where, especially when you're able to get healthy and build yourself and get yourself back into good standing in terms of from a health standpoint, it definitely means a lot and something that is important to note, because all the teams that had the extra bye got to the AFC and NFC championship. But all right, guys, we're gonna wrap it up for the KBR Sports Podcast. Remember, you guys can follow and subscribe to the KBR Sports Podcast on Spreaker, Rabble, YouTube, iTunes, and SoundCloud. That way you will never miss a KBR Sports episode, where all those, whenever it's streaming live or when a new episode is posted. And make sure you follow the KBR Sports Twitter page at KBR_sports, where the links and topics and other sports news are talked about on there. So make sure you go check it out, as well as my Twitter page at Abin Brendan, where you'll see all my different thoughts and reactions to different sports topics and everything like that. So make sure you guys go and check that out, because that happens in real time, where I can't always just get on a podcast right away and talk about things. You'll see my reaction. You don't have to wait a day or 2 days for my reaction to different things. So make sure you guys go and follow me on Twitter, as well as make sure you guys always, I want to make sure I plead with you guys, make sure you leave a comment, like, and just give me your thoughts and give me your opinions on different KBR sports topics. Do you think that we got the best AFC, NFC championship games to lead to a possible great Super Bowl? If you look at the storylines coming out of both games, we're set up to have great storylines. The 32-year-old prophet, or the chosen one, and Sean McVay possibly leading his team in his second season as a head coach to the Super Bowl. Andy Reid going and chasing his first championship as a head coach. The Bill Belichick with a dynasty and so on continue. Will Drew Brees be able to capture another Super Bowl and put himself in a similar debate and conversation with other quarterbacks? And all these different storylines and all these different scenarios, rematch, Rams Chiefs from earlier in the season, two young quarterbacks going at it together, the quarterbacks of the next generation. We have so many different storylines and so many different scenarios, but do you guys think these are the best storylines and scenarios we got from this divisional round weekend? Give me your opinions and thoughts. I would love to hear them all, and give me your thoughts about anything else I talked about during the podcast. I definitely want to hear what you guys have to say. But guys, until next time, I appreciate you all for tuning in. I always appreciate everybody who's a regular that tunes into the KBR Sports Podcast and helps to make this podcast so great and what it is. Always thanks, guys, and until next time, I'm out.